longer we hang on to that as a victim mindset, by the way, like when we're in exile, when we're like, oh man, life sucks, poor me. It just always happens to me. God, why are you doing this? The longer we stay there.
Yep.
Wow, we would have never believed this. We're on Spotify, we're on Apple, we're on Google. Go out there and listen to us. So we're excited about it. We're glad you're excited about it too.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Lunch Break. So glad to have you guys here, and we're having a special episode today that is a solo show without Tom. Tom's off doing some other business stuff, but I'm here today with a newer friend, but I think someone that's going to quickly become a good friend of mine, a fellow brother. We just got back actually from a retreat together, a bunch of Christian business owners, just trying to serve God and serve our families and find out how we can support each other. And I just want to welcome to the show Corey Huddleston.
Mike, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Dude,
and you're right, man. By the way, we are going to become great friends, man. So
yeah, I'm excited about that. And yeah, there's a lot of affinity between, and even from that first phone call, right? Like we hit it off pretty well.
Yeah,
but then spending time in person and doing all that for basically what is the better part of an entire week. Yeah, that was quite an experience, I gotta say. And I was telling everyone back here and my family and stuff, I was like, I've never been to a business event before where every session started off with worship.
Yeah, no, it was super profound. I'm the same way. I haven't been to anything like that, or quite like that, and I've been to quite a few events, out there specifically in the business world, and it was awesome, man. And it was really cool to see powerful men like yourself and some of the other men that were there, giving their absolute best, right, to the Lord, man. And then while we're learning and growing and learning how to grow our businesses and things like that, and all these men are committed to making an impact on society around them. So that was really great.
Yeah, for sure. So I know we were gonna kind of get into your story and like the evolution of that, which again you had shared some of that with me this past week.
Yeah.
But I think there's some really cool things that God's done in your life along the way.
Absolutely.
And then but now you're like you've put in the sweat equity, the hard work, and all that stuff, and become super successful in business and owning multiple different e-com brands. And is it Ricochet, the main brand there? Yeah. And do you want to tell everybody what you do real quick?
Sure. Yeah, I own a company called Ricochet Acquisitions. It's when I say acquisition, so we buy, sell, and scale e-commerce brands that have a ton of meat left on the bone. They're diamond in the rough companies, so we pick them up, value add, and then we find buyers for them on the back end and multiply our money. And we work with investors, people who are looking to do the same, to do that. So.
Yeah, that's super cool. But you didn't start there. Like you actually, which I'm not saying this to be cliche or whatever, but legitimately like came from humble beginnings of like, when you were a young kid, like would you have ever thought that you'd be here?
Man, no. I mean, I don't even know what I was like. I mean, when I was a young kid, so I grew up in a place called Amarillo, Texas, man. So it's growing now, but even still, if you go there, it's a lot more laid back type of environment, than where I live at now in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Very fast paced type of place, but lots to do and everything to do and all that.
Yeah.
But growing up, it was just I look back at it now, and I think like anybody that's got ambition in life, and you want to go out and you go grab a hold of things. You kind of leave thinking this place is too small for me. I want to go conquer the world, And then now looking back, I'm like, man, that offered so much value to me growing up in a place like that because people were so humble, man. And like there was this level of like, go out. You didn't have to worry. It wasn't like you were worried about whether or not your kid was going to get picked up by some weirdo while they're out riding their bike all day with their friends or whatever so much, And I mean, maybe it happened, I don't know, but it wasn't as prevalent, right?
No, it wasn't. There's a major evil in the world that's kind of grown significantly in the past 40 years.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and you grow up in a place like that where when you go out somewhere, my grandma passed away a couple of years ago, but just even going into a place like a grocery store or whatever, you stand at the checkout and you're talking to the person checking you out, looking them in the eyes and, hey, how are you doing? And speaking life over them and just really caring to know and people helping each other and things like that. So that part of it, I think, and once you kind of get into the bigger cities, you don't see as much, and it's unfortunate because it is such a key part of being human, that I think we miss out on some, and we don't even know we're missing it sometimes. So,
Yeah, I don't know if it was you and I that had that conversation
yeah,
about like, like my wife and I, we've always been known to like go and start a conversation with whoever's standing next to us in line,
yeah.
help them
No,
with
it was you and
everything.
I actually, because you were
Yeah,
talking about that bakery
and
stuff.
we go around like now, like people are like, you guys are kind of weirdos, and we're like, I think we're weirdos, maybe, but like I think in a good way.
Yeah. Or maybe it's the person saying that, right? Just because they don't know. But
Right.
yeah, I agree. And so growing up in Amarillo, very much like that. My family was all there. We had a big family and all that kind of stuff. Just super cool people, and I don't think we realized what we had, in that moment. But anyway, um, I was not a good student. My mom was
Hmm.
16 years old, by the way, when I was born. My dad was 18 years old, so they were still
Right.
babies, in that whole
Yeah, I
realm.
couldn't imagine having kids at that age for sure.
No, yeah, not that's no, there's no way. And I know that people do, and God bless them, but it was interesting because they were still young enough, though. Like I was still a part of them growing up, so
Yeah,
they didn't offer a lot of wisdom per se, and I'm not knocking them. It was just like in terms of life experience outside of
yeah,
like
they didn't
kind
have a
of
lot of life
survival.
experience.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But we did go a lot, and I remember like pretty much every weekend we were either going to the lake or going to the mountains, some kind of adventure, or going and doing something. And even though we didn't have a lot of money, back then things weren't, everything you had to pay for to go do outside of a little bit of gas money, and gas was cheap. So
Yeah, times were different growing up. Yeah, for sure.
yeah, exactly. So, grew up with that kind of environment. It seemed like, there was a lot of, I don't know, I never paid attention to it much, but now looking back, I know there was a lot of struggle, financially and stuff, and especially in those times when my dad was working hard and trying to figure out his way in life along the way. Um, I went to school. I was not a good student at all. Like, I mean, in fact, I pretty much failed my way through school, like C's, D's, and F's, man. And it's
Well,
like,
why do you think that was? Because I know it wasn't because you were dumb.
no, and I
That's not
appreciate
what
you
it
saying
was.
that. That's actually a really great question, and I've thought about it quite a lot. I think a lot of it was, uh, you know, when you have younger parents, right, and both like my
Hmm.
mom, they kind of grew up in an environment where their dad left, so she was one of five kids, and the last of those, and she was a twin, right? So they grew up in massive poverty, right?
Yeah.
And then my dad, he grew up in an environment where it was just he was on his own. He was out there, and like parents, didn't really engage in his life too much and all that stuff. So he was always trying to prove it. And I think, like one, I look back and I see what our diets do to our bodies and stuff right now. And
Hmm.
I see, so a lot of that I think probably had a lot because in Texas, man, sweet tea, Dr. Peppers and Coke,
Yeah.
stuff like that, is pretty much that instead of water. So I think a lot of that had a lot to do with it. I think I was pretty bored with school too. And I think like I'm left-handed. There's a lot of things that are going there that like it wasn't really built for people who like to think outside of the box. And I was very
Right.
creative growing up. And so I think we're getting there more now where people can engage more with that type of thing because there's more awareness around it. But back then there really wasn't too much. And other than that, man, I don't know. Maybe I was just so busy drawing all the time, looking out the window and visualizing things, and that's kind of where my head was at all the time. And I couldn't wait to get home and go fish or
Right.
uh, do
Do
things like
something more
that.
fun than sitting in the desk.
Yeah, exactly. So, um, anyway, going out there and giving my absolute, best in everything else I would do in life. Like whenever I go out, I was very attention detailed to things, but um, without a lot of guidance. And so moved on into high school and all that kind of stuff and started drinking. At that point in time, my parents started kind of going through a point in their life where they were getting a divorce and stuff. At 17 years old, I was living on my own. Uh,
Wow.
and, it was like I went out and I got my own apartment at 17 years old, right? And I had one roommate, and that was, it was basically a party house, man. I wasn't a
Sure.
Christian, by the way, whenever I was younger. So,
Hmm.
but anyway, eating ramen noodles or ramen noodles, however you say that. And then,
Yeah.
because that was all you could afford, kind of going into that. And then just working construction. And honestly, I thought, like life was going to be about hanging out with my buddies, drinking beer and just working hard and, having
Hmm.
to, the good hard life, like whatever. And in the back of my head, though, I did always love the idea of having a business. I just didn't know how to do that. Like I would remember, people would get so excited about sports icons or, like movie stars and things like that. And when they would meet them, and they thought that was
Hmm.
so cool. And this was even when I was a young kid, and I would care less about that kind of stuff. But whenever it came to like somebody in my class, their parents owned a restaurant or some kind of business, I was like that was the real Hollywood to me.
What
And
and
I,
why? Why do you think that was?
I don't know, man. Like I think it was just inherent in there. Like that's one thing I'll always say. And I've met, out of all the successful people I know, whenever they were kids, there was always this feeling of greatness inside of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was inside of everybody. And I was having a
Mm.
conversation with a guy one time, and I asked him, I was like, "Hey, when you were a kid, did you have this feeling that you were born for something more, or like this feeling of greatness?" And he goes, "No, I've never had that." And I was like, I mean, it kind of took me back a little bit because I was like, okay, maybe I don't know, like that's not what everybody has. And so it took me a little bit, but once I discovered that that's not in everyone, and
Mm-hmm.
so I was trying to understand what that was inside of me, and not, we didn't have the internet and things like that back then. I wasn't a big reader. I didn't know how to go find information per se. So a lot of it for me was just kind of stepping over myself to try to figure out, what life is,
Yeah.
outside of a place to have fun, which was, kind of what I was fixated on. And I think, a lot of that too, like, specifically with my mom and my dad, and again, not to disrespect them, but I think there was a lot of that was more instilled in me to try to have fun with those things because growing up for them was high responsibility,
Mm-hmm.
like a lot of that thing. And so they wanted
Having
to
kids
try to,
early, they didn't get a chance to have a lot of fun.
yeah. And so they wanted to try to create that for us.
Yeah.
And in that you don't get equipped, for things as well, I think. So,
Mm-hmm.
but anyway, so going through that, and then after high school, man, I just kind of, like I said, I filled my way through all that, and I was on my own, all that stuff, and I started working in construction and just doing anything I could do with my back and my hands because that's what I thought men did. I didn't know. I didn't have any real example of that. My dad wasn't really a huge influence on me in terms of like how to be a man. Like he kind of found his identity in work and things like that, which was always hard growing up. He passed away a few years ago, and I've kind of understood some things differently since then
Mm-hmm.
that have given me a lot of insight and wisdom, I think, into that, and I've been able to like look at it completely different and love him for who he was. Uh, but when you're a kid and you're trying to figure out this world, it's not easy when you're like, dude, why aren't you teaching me how to navigate these things, or showing me the ropes
Yeah.
and things like that. But went out, started kind of figuring things out, and then about at like I don't know, I guess I was 18, 19 years old. A buddy of mine, his dad started a construction company, or was doing like HVAC things like that,
Mm-hmm.
and he was moving to Dallas Fort Worth to go launch this business, and I was like, I want to go. Like, I was just like, I just want to go. I want to get out of here, man. Uh, so all my buddies were getting their girlfriends pregnant, and
Mm.
kind of all that. And um, and by the way, like growing up, we did travel a lot. My dad worked at a nuclear missile facility.
Okay.
And so he would go and like he would go to these meetings, and he used to go out and lobby for cash or capital, to go out and build these
Really?
things up. And yeah, so we would make those into family vacations. But the interesting part was like I got to the United States and we never flew, like ever. It was always driving. So I saw that from the back seat of a car most of this country.
Okay.
And I think that set something inside of me to see like the world's much bigger, too.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remembered when I was a kid, all I wanted to do was either move to Dallas, Fort Worth, Arizona, or Georgia. Like those were the three places that really stuck out to me as places I would want to live in my life. Ended up
Okay.
moving to Dallas, Fort Worth during this time. And we lived in a place called Paradise, Texas, dude. I was out in the middle of nowhere. Like, I mean, Paradise, Texas sounds like this place you go and it's just like you want to die there, right? Like,
Uh-huh.
pretty much you go out to Paradise, Texas, you will die there. You know.
It's not really paradise. They just
Yeah,
call
no,
it
no,
that.
no. Yeah. I mean, it's probably up and coming now a lot more than back then. But it was the
Uh-huh.
backwoods back then. But it was fun. I mean, I lived with my buddy's dad, and then he came with us too. And so it was us three trying to build this thing. We lived out there, and we'd go work, dude, from 4 in the morning until 5, 6 at night outside doing HVAC on these new builds and things like that, and just be sunburnt and just giving our all, man. And then we'd go back, get some whiskey or something, and barbecue every night. So it was kind of like my life, man.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to realize, like, man, I need something bigger than this. After a while, I'm like, here I am, like 20 years old or whatever, 21, or I wasn't even 21 at that point. But like we were out there doing, just working hard and doing all that, and ended up going to work at a place called Purina Mills. Purina Mills
The dog
was
food
like
company?
yeah, so they have a big facility in Fort Worth over here where they make like horse and cattle feed and all that stuff too.
Okay.
And I was working there 5 at night till 5 in the morning, 6 to 7 days a week, man. I had no
It's a lot.
wife outside of there. Again, hard work, back-breaking stuff, and I just thought that's what you do as a man, especially
Mm-hmm.
since oh, by the way, I didn't graduate high school, but I ended up getting kicked out and because I wasn't showing up. I was skipping a lot when my parents were getting that divorce and all that. So that kind of held me back a little bit in my mind, I think, of thinking what I was able to go and accomplish.
Hmm.
And anyway, this place brought me on. I was making good money working there all night long, 5 at night till 5 in the morning, but I had no life, right? And when I did have time off, I went to the bar and I'd be drinking or something like that with my buds or whatever. And one day I was at the bar and I met this guy and he was wearing this really nice suit. And I was like, man, what do you do like for a living? Like, because I used to judge, success based on this dude's wearing a suit or not. I don't know why. Now I would never do that, but it was funny. But he's like, man, I think he was a director of sales or a GM, or I don't remember something. It had something to do with sales. Now, I mean, this was
Okay.
over 20 years ago, or whatever. But we got to talking, and I was like, how do I learn how to do what you're doing, right? Because I was started to develop this really strong hunger for success, and I was just looking for a path, right? And he goes, man, I honestly feel like you should read Rich Dad Poor Dad. And
Hmm.
it was interesting because at that point in time, I don't think I had ever read a book cover to cover other than like Green Eggs and Ham as a kid, dude, like for real. And I don't even know if I read that cover to cover, to be honest with you. I
Uh-huh.
just didn't find joy in reading. And but there was something about that moment and that guy, right? And I went to the Barnes and Noble or whatever and bought the book, started reading it, and dude, I devoured it. I think like in 2 days I read that whole book, which again, coming from never reading to all of
Yeah.
a sudden that, and I do remember that I remembered thinking like I didn't even know there were books like this out there. Like that's
Uh-huh.
how completely oblivious I was to the world around me, you
That
know.
was
And
one of the first business books I ever read too. I remember that, and there was something, yeah, there's something like ignited inside. Yeah.
yeah, and it was simple to read because it was in story format, and there was something
Mm-hmm.
about it that I resonated with, right? Because I think the way he did that was interesting because he created this dichotomy of like the kid who was the son, right, and then he
Yeah.
became this wayward son, and uh, just the way that it kind of came together. And I think inherently that was what I desired too, is to kind of have somebody take me under their wing and show me the ropes, and in a way that was kind of created that scenario,
Yeah.
but it
Uh-huh.
totally like changed the perspective I had of life around me because I started looking at everything as an opportunity,
Yeah.
right? It was just like it shifted
It
my
opened your eyes
process.
to what's possible.
Yeah, and then it was like I couldn't even look at a street sign, without being like, "Oh, business idea, boom, 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 boom." And then and it was cool, but at the same time, you fall into that trap at that point of kind of the entrepreneur thing, right? So,
Yeah.
because as you know as well as I do, man, like going out and starting something it's much more than just the idea itself, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, and it requires, you to kind of commit, and be all
Some
in
hustle.
and
Yeah.
that type of thing. And that was hard for me because I had a significant amount of like self-limiting beliefs and uh, like self-hatred, maybe. I don't even know. Like just from all the things that I didn't accomplish
Negativity
in
and
life.
discouraging
Yeah,
thoughts, and yeah.
that were like weighing me down, And
Mm-hmm.
so I knew, like, from that book, I really started getting just like what else is out there. And so I started buying all his other books. And at that time, Robert Kiyosaki was actually out traveling a lot more. And this
Mm-hmm.
was before he really blew up a lot. But, and
Was this
so,
the early 2000s around that
yeah,
time?
exactly. Yeah,
Yep.
right around there. And so there was this point where he was coming to do a seminar or like an event in Dallas Fort Worth at the time. And
Mm-hmm.
we reached out and he was looking for volunteers. So me and my buddy signed up to go volunteer because we basically got access to the event for free, right, to be
Right.
there and volunteer. And then I got to meet him. I had him sign my books and all that kind of thing. And but anyway, I was like super hungry for that. And then started putting myself in these rooms, man. I started like listening on the radio because at the time I was still doing those 12 at night or at 5 at night till 5 in the morning, 12-hour work days, 6 to 7 days a week. And I started reading the business section in the newspaper and just anything I could do to sharpen my mind, man, and it was like I was so hungry. And I would hear things like on the radio because back then we didn't have the internet like available everywhere. It was super slow and all that, like AOL
Yep.
stuff. But I would be listening to the radio and it'd be like 4X, like training and this and that, or anything I could that was about investing or business or whatever. I was like, I'm in,
Yep.
let's go, like signing up to go to these things. And most of them were just pitched, things like webinars basically,
Yeah.
except for free webinars.
Seminar, live in person. Yep. I know.
Yeah.
I know. I was on. You're like speaking like a lot of similarities here because I was on
Yeah.
the same path.
That's awesome. Yeah. And so, I started going out there and what was valuable for that was one, I started learning how to assess the difference between valuable information and non-valuable information, right? Because I had no bearing on that in the beginning of that. To me, is like, the world was just the world, and I had a very small understanding of that, right?
Yes.
And so that gave me that, but more importantly, is it gave me this ability to start connecting with people. And I didn't know I had a gift for that, but it turns out that I did. And I started going out and I think, like anything, I think because you think that you're playing from behind the eight ball a little bit, you tend to over exaggerate on things. And so for me, I knew because I didn't have a high school degree or diploma or any of that type of thing, right, that I was going to have to do things differently. I had to use other sets of skills. And so and I was already kind of used to that because being left-handed, man, you think differently anyway, because everything's built for right-handed people, in the world.
Right.
And that's not, I don't care. I'm just saying, like, it's just, you learn to
It's
think
just a
about
fact.
things from a different
Yeah.
perspective. And so, dude, I started really going all in on my ability to develop relationships, and so I put myself out there all the time, and started learning how to connect and like find people like, oh, you do this, you should know this person. And I started doing a lot of that. And what that did was over time, it put me in rooms with highly successful people a lot of the time, whereas like maybe I didn't have any other gifts to give them, or at least I felt like, but I knew how to connect people really well. And people always love being around a connector,
Yep. Yep.
And so, and then what it also was cool because it fed that desire I had to learn and grow and to understand and to see. And you start meeting people that were famous. Like I still remember, you ever heard that song "Celebrate Good Times"? Come on, they play it every New Year's and all that. It's a guy by the Kool and the Gang. They wrote it, but a guy named Sir Earl Toon actually wrote that song. He was in that group, and I remember one time I was at church and that dude came walking out, and I didn't even know who he was. I just started talking to him, and he told me about that, and I was like, dude, that's awesome. Like I was a kid listening to this whole thing. And it ended up like because of my connections and things like that, I was able to work with him to do some stuff. And here I was over at his house, sitting in the chair where he uses to produce music. And I was sitting there thinking about how ironic that was because as a kid, I would like hear that song every New Year, and it was just like this iconic thing. And then here I am at this point in my life,
cool.
a different point in my life, like sitting in his chair with him, brainstorming ideas to help him grow his thing. And I was just like, it was a pretty mind blowing, cool thing. But that's happened many times since, of just where I've got to work with these cool people just because of my willingness to try to help them connect and grow. So
yeah, I say that very frequently. Everything good in my life has come from just serving God and serving other people. And it sounds like that, that's what you're doing is serving other people. You're like, how can I help you? And 100%. I think that we do that in business too, right? But it's like our business. But if you make it only about money, it doesn't work. But if you make it about just serving, it does.
100%. Well, and that's the thing is like I didn't know the Lord at that point in time. Like so when I'm working at Purina, right? I was working 5 nights till 5 in the morning.
Regardless.
There was a maintenance guy that worked there, and his name was Michael Murphy, man. And it was funny because I was at a place in my life where I was drinking all the time and just like living wheels off, and like all that kind of stuff. And he would come around inside of the Purina and like he was the maintenance guy there. And if you've ever watched The Simpsons, there's a guy on there called Ned Flanders. He's like a Christian dude, and I would call him Flanders was kind of his nickname in almost a mocking way. And I look back at that now. I mean, he would laugh about it, but it was still, something I'm not super proud of. But at the same time, dude, he would always come down and talk to me and like just talk to me about Jesus, man, and just constantly doing that. And he'd invite me to church and I'd tell him why I couldn't go and all that kind of stuff. When in reality, I knew I needed to. I just never felt like I was good enough to go. I had that limiting belief about what that actually was. And so, man, I just like one Easter, like he finally got to me. I don't know, man. It was just like going down and talking to me, building that relationship. And it was like Easter, and he invited me to go to church with him, and I did. But I'd stayed up the night before drinking with my buddy, so I came in like
Mm-hmm.
super hungover. And I just remember like going in there and feeling like totally out of place. Like, why am I in this place? Like, this people like me don't belong here. It's kind of my
Mm-hmm.
philosophy, right?
Yeah.
Which I know now is completely skewed. But and that was the devil, like
Yeah,
100%.
absolutely, 100%.
But anyway, dude, and it was just like afterwards he invited me to his parents' house or whatever his family's in. His family like totally was like super cool, and he had these little boys, and they were like, "We love you, Corey," like kind of. I mean, it was just I hit it off with them out of the gate. I had this cool Jeep, and the boys liked it a lot, and all this, and it was just like, dude, I started feeling something in here, that I hadn't felt in a long time. And that really opened the door, and it really kind of triggered my desire to understand more. And like I had this little orange Gideon Bible, like that. I don't even know how I got it, to be honest with
Mm-hmm.
you, but it was somewhere in a nightstand or whatever. And so I started trying to read that and understand it. And if you've ever read one of those, they're like not that easy to read anyway, no matter how intelligent you are. And I told him that I was like, dude, I've been trying to read that Gideon's Bible, and like I don't know, the next day or two he came back in. He's like, dude, I got something for you. And then like he got me a Bible, and I have it still. I read in it every day. But it had my name engraved on the front of it. It was this black Bible, dude. And I was like, and it's like probably the most meaningful gift I had ever received. In
Yeah.
that whole deal. And it was easier to read for sure. Like kind of did that, but. And then, dude, he just walked it out with me, and here it was. And by the way, this guy, this is for all y'all watching right now that you feel like, hey, I'm not as outgoing as Mike or as outgoing as Corey, and I'm not a connector and I'm not all that. It doesn't even matter because here's this guy that's working, 5 at night till 5 in the morning in the middle of a feed thing who influenced me, right, to come to know Jesus in that way. And dude,
Yeah.
since that time, I mean, it like boom, lit me on fire, in like different ways, and kind of set this path that changed my life, and has changed the life of a lot of other people because now I have influence with a lot of other people as well because of him. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Stepping out.
One
And
one
so,
guy, and
yeah,
and if all he ever did was affect you, and you
right.
affected so many other
Yeah, and
people,
he'll be able to, yeah, in heaven, he'll get the glory for that. You know what I'm saying? Because he
right?
was the one that was bold enough to step into that. And he's the kind of guy, man. He's a handsome dude, but man, he just was nervous around people. Like he couldn't even be in a room more of like 3 or 4 people that he didn't know without getting a nervous stomach and just being like, oh, I mean, it was. So I think back to that often, and like how, it's like there's really no excuse for us to not share our faith, because you don't
That's right.
know what you're impacting. But anyway, went down that road, started learning a lot more, and then kind of started going down that road of. I had a buddy, it was actually this girl I was dating at the time, but she was connected to this other guy who ran a mortgage company, and man, I thought I was gonna be the next Donald Trump, man. Like I was like straight up, like I like to what I thought success was, and I had these
Mm-hmm.
dress clothes, which looking back now they were like clubbing clothes, I mean, it still wasn't even that good, you
Uh-huh.
know. I mean, it's just what I knew. I don't know. And I used to brush my hair backwards, like, but kind of like the 1980s, like deal maker, kind of deal.
Like
And
Gordon Gekko.
yeah, exactly. I thought that was success. Again, these images of what we portray.
Right.
And I remember like going into that, and like they were hiring mortgage brokers, and I went and talked to the guy and who was running it, and then he was like, dude, you're awesome. Like, let's bring it in. Just because of my personality. I really didn't have all the accolades as much as some of
Yeah.
the other people there, but he liked my
He
personality
saw
and stuff.
potential.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember the first time going out, and he was like, here's how you got to do it. You got to call all these real estate agents, start developing relationships. And so I'd go out, and I'm finding any real estate agents I can find on their cards. And I remember the first one I called was some lady, and I called her up, and I'm like, hey, this is Corey Huddleston with Integrity Mortgage Group, da, da, da. And I sounded just like I was running a radio show, bro. Like, I mean, it was like, I went into like this fake pitch almost because I was
Yeah.
like, I need to sound professional. And she was like, what? I mean, like all automatic. I mean, it was just like this. Who is this? And then she was like, click, and I was like, oh crap, what did I do? Like, oh my gosh, I just, I was like, I'm totally out of my element right now. And
But you know what's funny about that? I had a conversation with my wife driving back last night, and we were
yeah,
talking about um, failure versus success, and like what we were, and she sees it too. She's like, the really the only difference between failure and success is the successful people just kept going after they failed, and they keep failing and
yeah.
keep failing and learn the next thing, and then keep failing and learn the next thing. And so, like, your failures are what lead to success. Your failures are only a failure if you stop right there. So you
You're
kept going
100%
with that.
right, man. Well, yeah, and I did for a little bit in there, but I will say I had just significant, like, I was insecure, dude. Like, I'm not gonna lie. I just was like still trying to figure myself out, and I thought that was gonna be the way, but it was like it wasn't. But I learned a lot inside of that, and it kind of pushed me to grow, and it put me around again, kept elevating my reality, and that was a big part for me, because I was coming from a pretty lower part of that. So. Um, but I stayed in it. And you're absolutely right. And I would love to touch on that because I think like most people have this idea that, if you get into it and it just doesn't work, that somehow you're the failure and it's just not meant to be. And it's like, it's just not true. Like there's no reality in which that exists. There are a few people out there who go in and they start this business up and then they're an overnight success and they do that, but that is absolutely not the normal thing. Like
Yeah,
it
I was
yeah.
listening to a podcast. You probably listen to Business Wars.
No, I've
Um,
never heard of it.
oh, it was a great podcast. You would love it.
Cool.
Anyway, they were talking. It was about this episode was about Elon Musk, and they were talking about Tesla and all this stuff. But like how many times Tesla almost went bankrupt. Um,
Yeah.
and now they're like this behemoth company, and Elon's the richest person in the world. But how many times did he have to fail or nearly fall on his face or fall on his face in order to reach that level of success?
Yeah. Well, and there's story after story. He's actually, you're right. I mean, he's gone through and he puts it all on the line,
Yeah,
and but he knows how to build things, man. That guy's super smart, and he goes for it, and he knows how to build teams. There's a lot of things to learn from that story, I think inside of that, and a lot of people give him heck because it's like, well, he got government money, and it's like, well, what have you done? Because like that doesn't just happen. They don't just go around and throw money
yeah.
at people,
Let me. Yeah, there's no one sitting in the government office looking for people to hand money to.
Right. Yeah, but they're definitely looking to take it, right?
Oh
No.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So, but anyway, like you start getting into that, and then after that, I had a landscaping company with a guy, and there was multiple stories, along the way of kind of going through a lot of that, and then ultimately, I found that I wanted to be in marketing, and that was really something that excited me, and this was, probably 15 years ago. I really started to dig in and really understand. Like I felt like that was my call, and so this was right when video was starting to kind of become a thing. Like you didn't have to have $30,000 cameras to be able to go out and shoot. DSLRs were starting to
Hmm.
come out and start to do that, and I didn't know anything about it, but I knew it was the way forward. And at the time, I got a call from a buddy of mine. He's like, "Man, we've got this live streaming platform. Now it's everywhere, but back then
Yeah.
it wasn't. And it was like, how do you do this? For without having all this expensive equipment." And he goes, "Man, like, do you know anybody who would be interested in that?" And I went to their office, and it was like a guy who was, I think he was a billionaire dude who had funded the thing to build it out, and then he was working under him. And so I went and sat down with him, and I was like, "Show me what you're doing," because at that time I'm hyper connected, and my Rolodex was fat, at that point. And so I was like, "Oh, okay." Like once I got what they were trying to do, I was like, "I do have that." And then so rather than going in and trying to be like, um, pay me this to go sell it or whatever else. I was like, I went out and just started making introductions, but I was like, I'm going to be in on every single one of these meetings because I want to see exactly how y'all are doing it. And went out and started setting them up with all these meetings. And a few of those guys ended up signing up, but one of them was this ministry that I was a part of at the time called Wingman Ministries. And a guy
Hmm.
named Chad Hennings, he's a three-time Super Bowl champion on the Dallas Cowboys, and he had started that up. And I was like, I remember the first time I walked into that group, and I was like, it was like the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow with all these older wise men who were Christian
Hmm.
and been successful in business and all of that. And I was like, dude, this is everything I've been looking for. And there's guys my age all over the place. At the time, I was in my 30s. I'm about to be 45, but in my lower 30s or whatever. And like, so he was like well, I brought him in. We set that up because I was like, this is how we get it out there. And so what ended up happening was we had that meeting set up, and they explained how we could set it up and do all that. And I was like, I'll run the media side of this. Y'all buy the equipment, I will do it all. Like, and I was like, because I knew where video was going, and I wanted to start
Mm-hmm.
doing that. So they were like, Chad had been like, okay, well, let's think it through. And then he had called because I had called my other buddy and said, hey, let's come to the meeting, and we should know an answer by the end of this thing because we were going to have our meeting. And Chad came up to me before that and he goes, hey man, we've decided not to pull the trigger on this thing. And I was like, what? I was like, no, that's not going to happen, dude. And I called him. I was like, dude, let's pray right now. So we started praying about it. And then literally by the end of that meeting, and he came back over and he goes, Corey, we're back on. We just had a guy come over and offer to fund the whole thing, like to buy everything, like by the end of that meeting. So immediately, man, I was like, boom, I'm in business, dude. And so we went out and I started figuring out all the stuff we needed to buy and pull that trigger on that. We got it all set up and we started broadcasting live in the mornings and all that. And I'm running it. But what I started doing was I utilized that opportunity because I would take the equipment home, and then I was like, I would play around with it and get to know it. And then I would go get jobs with the equipment, which I don't know if that's right or wrong or whatever else, but kind of the old school way of using other people's money, right?
Yeah.
So I was able to use that equipment to go out and get filming opportunities and started making money. And I built a marketing agency out of that for video production. And then I taught myself everything, man. I taught myself,
Dude, I
editing.
didn't know any of. Okay, we're gonna have to talk about this offline more, but I didn't know any of this stuff about you, bro.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this is what really got me going. And then then another buddy of mine, he called me. He's like, "Dude, I need a website." And he goes, "Do you do those?" And I was like, "Yeah, I do." And I was like, "I have no idea how to do that." So
That's how we do it, right?
totally. I went on YouTube and I'm like, "How to build a website, dude?" And I'm just like,
Uh-huh.
boop, 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 and started doing that. Taught myself how to do like and design, inside of like Adobe Illustrator and all that stuff. And
But the real answer is, I don't. Like, if you're asking if I know how to do every single thing to get it done right this second, the answer is no. But if you're asking, can I get it done? The answer is yes, because I'll
Right.
figure out a way to get it done, and that's just how
100%.
entrepreneurs roll.
Yeah, and that was, and it's. I know a lot of other people out there. They're like, man, you shouldn't do that, and it's like, but how else are you gonna learn? I really do think it's important as long as you do have the character to fulfill, and that's the big thing, right? Because it's not just get people to pay you, and then all of a sudden you just you ghost them, and then they're done. And so, but that was an interesting thing because as a guy who loves to be connected, and
Mm-hmm.
is fueled by that man, being in video at that time was, and then even still, I think it's super valuable. But if you're somebody who's younger and or doesn't even matter if you're younger, if you're looking to get out there and get open doors to opportunities, if you can learn how to do video production and specifically in a way that helps people elevate their social media presence, there's no room you can't enter.
Yeah.
Everybody wants you, like if
Yeah.
you're good at it. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. That's
Yeah.
that's one of the easier things I've ever had to sell.
Right. And so now you're starting to, because if you can help them get their message out and you can be an advisor to them, somebody they can trust along the way that can give them ideas and kind of take that ball and run with it, and you're not somebody that has to be told what to do all the time.
Yep.
You're kind of a self-starter. Man, at that time, I mean, it opened so many doors, started getting me in front of all these influencers and things like that, because they would need video production work done. And I'm not going to say it didn't suck sometimes because when you do that, everybody thinks that it's like, well, you already got the camera, like it's just your time at this point, and like, they kind of devalue, what you're doing. So you've got to learn how to contend with that a little bit.
Yeah.
But other than that, I mean, like if you're good at what you do and you're good at, you have some business savvy, I think you can go a long way even still today, with some of that
Oh yeah.
stuff.
No, for sure you can. We're doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And so, as time went on in the marketing world, I started to build out a team and all of that. I was a miserable leader. I didn't, at that point in time, know how to do that super well, but I knew I needed to learn. I brought on a business partner. Ended up it was cool because we were able to go out and start developing out these strategies like for people. And he showed me some things. He was an older guy. He had been successful. I met him through Wingman actually. And at the point in time, he's a very, very intelligent guy. I love him today. We still talk all the time. But like we built out these strategies, and he was like, if we can sell these strategies, that'll front load the business, to be able to go do these other projects. And I was like, that's smart. And he goes, that's what all the big agencies do. And so we went into this meeting with one of these guys that he knows, like $100 million. And at this point in time, I had never sat in front of it because in my mind, my limiting belief, I was like, man, companies like that have marketing teams. Like you just gotta, you think they do, right? And I
Hmm.
go in there and sit down, and they didn't. They had people that could do some stuff, but it was
Right.
nothing like
A lot of times they'll have like a guy or like even a CMO, but they don't do it in house. They just
yeah.
hire people to do it. They're just like, oh, well, we're in charge of getting it done. They're
100%. And I
professional
was
managers.
completely, I had myself believing all kinds of lies about that,
Yep.
how that worked. And I mean, I'm trying to make points as we're going through this because I want whoever's listening to be able to kind of grasp some of this because, it's like we can become our own worst enemies sometimes.
Yeah. Well, and there is a point that I want to. I don't want to interrupt where you're going, but I want to come back to something in a second. So.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so we went out and he goes, well, here's what we'll do. We'll go out and to this guy at the end of it, we kind of told him what we could do. And then we said, so here's how we roll. We start out with a strategy. That strategy is $5,000. And from there, like you'll get an overview of where your company's at, where it needs to go, and then everything in the middle, and then how we can help you do that. You walk away either with that, and you can take that and go implement it anywhere, or you engage us, and we'll just roll that into whatever work you're going to be doing
Hmm.
with us in the future. And the dude bought it, and I'm sitting there going like, crap, that just worked. Oh my gosh, like I was like, I couldn't believe it, I was like, and now $5,000, I mean, it's like whatever, but to me at that point in time, it was a lot. I mean, it's
Hmm.
still a lot, but and we ended up going and doing that, and then engaging them, to help them out with their marketing and stuff. And then once we did that, now I had to go through the work of actually putting it together, which was a lot of work,
Fulfillment.
but we ended
Yeah.
up getting it done. And now I had a system and a framework to execute on. So now everybody we were meeting with, it was like you didn't even work with us unless you were going to pull the trigger on a $5,000 strategy on the front end. And then that went to $10,000, over time, by the way. So it was a great way to kind of weed out who we didn't want to work with, because if you didn't have money on the front end to do that, you probably weren't going to have money to engage us in long term anyway. And so there was a strategy to it, but we started doing that. And eventually, man, I just kind of burnt out on that. My creativity was just being like all in. I was like, I didn't know how to lead the teams effectively and all that.
Hmm.
And I was like, man, I want to start building out products. And that was like really the big thing. So I went on this big mission to kind of build that out on the product side and went through a few different things there. Ultimately, coming and I'm just trying to shorten this up for the sake of time, but
Yeah.
coming
Yeah.
back through on the side of investing and doing things like that, where it was like, okay, how do I make these dollars work for me? How do I find a product or whatever else, inside of that? Started talking with a friend of mine. He'd been in the acquisition space for 26 years on the e-commerce side of it. And if you've been around in the e-commerce world, it hadn't been around much longer than that in any meaningful
Right.
way, anyway. So having that kind of experience across the board and having done deals, in the millions of dollars and, built companies up and all that, plus my experience in business, and I had some successes in between that too, but
Hmm.
uh, we ended up coming together. I built out Ricochet Acquisitions, brought him on board, and then we started building out a team. And here we are today, man. And we've got 26 companies that we operate inside of that on the e-commerce side, plus what we will buy and then flip on the backside of that for people that are looking to buy businesses and as an investment tool. It's very much everybody uses this terminology, but digital real estate, if you think of it in that way, you're essentially
Hmm.
buying companies that already have established frameworks that are very minimal in terms of operation, and then you're able to scale those up and add your kind of sweet spot kind of value add to it, and then scale them up and then put them on an exit. And right now, there's a lot of opportunity around that, and so it's been very, very good for us, in terms of building that out and continuing to do so. But it's a way for us to create impact along the way as well. But it was a long journey, and that's really what I want for people to understand inside of that is it's like it was a progressive, like you said. I never gave in. I
Yeah.
knew there was something in there, and it'll probably still evolve. This story will be much longer here in a few more years, but uh, inside of that, I mean, it's kind of that adventure, and I want people to plug in and really like look at it like that. This is not a beat down. This is not something you have to endure. It's something you get to experience, and something you get to build. But take on that mindset of like you're literally taking these ideas that exist inside of your head that God has put inside of you. He created you a certain way, and your act is literally, or your life is literally an expression of worship. Everything that we do, the words that we say, the relationships that we build, the businesses that we get to build, it, I mean, every time I'm doing what I do inside of this company, I feel like I'm sitting down and playing Legos with my kids. It's like, oh, this one
Mm,
needs that one and that one. And then like you're building this thing and you're putting form to it, and everything in this world is literally uh, built like that. Like this
yeah.
phone, I mean, the way we're able to communicate, that started in somebody's mind first.
Yeah. Well, what
Right.
what what I think is cool, and as you're talking and saying this, like what it makes me think of is like some of the hardest things I've gone through in life and in business, and a lot of the hardest things I've gone through in life has been because of the business. Um, have like I remember going through some stuff like several years ago, and I was like, man, like I felt like it was crushing me. And now looking back, I was like, oh, that wasn't that big of a deal.
Yeah,
But like it's like God levels you up, It's like
sure.
you got to go through something hard because like what is in store beyond that is like so much greater than anything that you can imagine, but like you're not ready for it, so you got to go through the hard part that sometimes sucks,
Yeah.
in order to be equipped internally, mental toughness and the mental fortitude to go to the next level, because it requires a different skill set.
Yeah, I call that exile, man. Like, so whenever I like about a year ago, I guess I was sitting there thinking about exile. Like, and all throughout Scripture, you look at all the major characters of the Bible, dude, and if you really break it down, almost every single one of them has existed in some form of exile.
Mm,
Like they were
yeah.
out ostracized from their world, and
Uh-huh.
it's like that can come in different forms, right? So it's not necessarily like you get kicked out of your city, and if you ever show up, they're gonna like string you up, and you're done, or whatever. But it's sometimes it is like, dude, something the bottom falls out of a project you're working on, and it puts you, like mentally in a bad space or whatever else. And what I've found over the years is that when you fall into this level of exile, all that ever is God breaking the matrix off of you.
Mm, yeah.
Like it's an opportunity to like be transformed, and then now you're starting to actually be able to trust Him more and see that He's actually in control of all of this, man. I
Yeah.
think if you're weighing your heart throughout things and you're like, man, I've done everything I know how to do, and I've taken this as far as I can, and sometimes that waiting place is only storing up like a catalyst. It's like it's catalyzing that energy inside of you, like that life force, right? So that whenever um the opportunity does come around, you're ready to attack it, man. And so I think that God has like definitely He has a purpose to all of this. And then when you come out of that, now it's like this rebirth of your whole reality, man, because you're
Yeah.
completely in a different place. You've been through the fire a little bit. You got a little bit more wisdom. You don't have the same limiting beliefs that you did. And the longer we hang on to that as a victim mindset, by the way, like when we're in exile, when we're like, oh man, life sucks, poor me. It just always happens to me. God, why are you doing this? The longer we stay there.
Yep. Yep. I know people that are, significantly older than you or I that are still there to this day and probably will never get out of it.
Yeah. And all it is a choice to believe
Yeah.
differently.
Yeah. And
You know?
and what it makes me think of is, in James it talks about like rejoice in your trials.
Yeah.
And like for the longest time I was like, oh well, that means like even when things suck, like still like continue praising God. What it actually meant, and I like, and now like have gone through quite a few things, and like I get it, and like and I do, like rejoice because of your trials, right?
100%.
Like because like, and what I've seen, and I'm sure you have a perspective on this too, Corey, but like I've seen like those are actually, I kind of get excited sometimes when I'm in that, because like that's when I get really close to God.
Yeah, man. And it can be hard. Like it's funny. I mean, I say funny, but over the last, like since like 2020, uh, whenever all that stuff went down, my dad passed away in 2020. My grandma passed away in 2021. My cousin passed away in 2022, and then my grandpa just passed away this year. So it was like this boom, and on top of that, you throw in COVID and how all of that went down. And for me, like, it wasn't, I know we all had a way of thinking about that, but it was like, I'm hard of hearing, man. And so all these people are wearing masks and they talk light on top of that. And they're like, oh, oh. And I can't read their
Hmm.
lips, you know? And then on top of that, you go places and you're getting basically talked down to by people who are working in fast food, not to, throw anybody under the bus, but it was just like,
Yeah.
dude, I'm paying you money, not the other way around. Like, give me my food and treat me with respect, or I'll never
Right.
stop here again, you know? So, or not that I eat fast food, but you get what I'm saying. Like, the whole premise of like that whole thing was just a massive insult to like, life in general, I think. And
Yeah.
so,
For sure. Well, and
and
I think there was an evil agenda on that too, on top of it.
yeah,
But that's a whole nother rabbit hole that we could go
for
down
sure,
for
dude. I'm
hours,
down.
Corey.
I'm down to go down that road. But
Right.
the what was interesting is when my dad passed away, and I wasn't wise enough to see it at that point in time until after my grandma. But I found that whenever something ends is very final, right? So once I realized, like the day he died, there was never an opportunity for us to ever be what I wanted it to be or anything like that. It was just done. You know what I'm saying? To the point
Hmm.
where you become okay with that. There's like this brick of time, right? That is like super significant. We mostly miss it because we're so much in, oh, poor me, poor me, poor me. And like, it's okay to have time where you're sad and all that kind of stuff. But if you take a step back and you kind of detach from the situation, obviously trusting God and kind of grasping the reality of the situation, like there's nothing you're going to do about it. Nothing, like,
Yeah.
and so you just got to kind of accept it for what it is. And then you look at it from a catalyst. I call it the shift, right? Because there's this time in between there that is super fertile because you like there's this like surge of emotional like reaction to that. And then on top of
Hmm.
that, you're like, when you go to a funeral, man, like if it's somebody you kind of know or whatever, at least for the very rest of the day you kind of have a different approach, a philosophy about life. You're like, man, what really matters in this life? You're like deeply thinking about this stuff, you know?
Yeah.
When it's somebody that's super close to you, like you're thinking about it much longer than that, and you're trying to reconcile some of these things, like, how could this have been different? What was he really trying to say there? There's a lot of those types of things that you're trying to make sense of, and then, it happens again, and then I realize, man, those are actually the most fertile times in your life. And if you use them properly, it's like a catapult for your future. And so you can become something like what you want to become so much faster if you're aware and willing to embrace that pain and that emotion
Hmm.
and that all of that stuff all at the same time and let it be used like a rubber band being pulled back and just ready to go. So
That's a good word, bro. Love it. So, we got to start wrapping up.
yep.
So, in doing that, like, what final words do you want to leave people with? Like, if something like the last thing you would want to say.
What I say to my kids all the time, like everything going on in the world right now, even if it's not right now, or if it's 100 years from now or 1,000 years from now, when somebody's listening to this, there is no anything more important than seeking first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you.
Hmm.
In business,
Amen.
we find ourselves trying to hustle and to go out and I've been guilty of it, right? Like
Hmm.
especially when you come from lack and you're like, man, I got to go grind and get this, and you got to fight for everything. It's that survival mentality. And I think if you ever get to that place, you need to take a step back and breathe and then realize that God's in control. Rest in that. Seek Him first above all things, and then out of that, realize like He created the world. He created everything in this world. And He'll create everything long after we're dead and gone, and He sustains it in the palm of His hand. Like to take care of you is His greatest delight, and literally in the grand scheme of things, it's nothing. Like I mean, it's
Yeah,
easy for Him to bless you. You
for
know,
sure.
just expect it and walk in that. And be in communion with Him. And no matter where you're led in this life, through praying, through trials, through failures, through all that, but you're gonna have wins too, and expect those. Like honor Him, and use it. Just know that you're here as an expression of Him, an extension of Him. So.
Cool. And if people want to connect with you, Corey, or learn more about Ricochet, or any of those things, like where would you want them to look at you at?
Yeah, thank you, man. Ricochetacquisitions.com is our website, and then my email is Corey at ricochetacquisitions.com. That's Cory. And then Ricochet is Ricochet, and then acquisitions ACQUI SITIONS, right? .com. Or I'm sorry, Ricochet Brands, BRANDS on that one. But
Cool.
yeah,
And I believe Abby got all the info from you too, so we can put the links and
yep, absolutely. So
cool.
thank you so
And
much for
Alex will
having
take
me.
care of that. Oh, it was great having you, bro. I think you and I could talk for hours.
For sure, man. I'm down. I would love to do this again anytime. So.
Oh, would love to have you, bro. Yeah, for sure. Cool. Well, thank you all for watching. Have a great day. God bless.